Let's think about global power for a second. Our minds almost automatically go straight to massive armies, sprawling military bases, or, nuclear weapons. But what if I told you that the true power, like the absolute ultimate control over our planet, isn't sitting in a missile silo somewhere? It's actually hidden right there in the physical geography of our oceans. Welcome to this explainer. Today we're looking at 14 tiny, almost invisible lines on the map that quietly dictate the fate of entire nations.
Okay, let's dive into this, because it's going to completely change how you view geopolitical power. In the world of geopolitics, these narrow maritime pathways are known as choke points, and the terrifying reality is this. If a major power decides to just close one or two of these doors today, by tomorrow morning, the entire global economy could essentially collapse. We're talking about massive financial impacts, skyrocketing prices for everyday goods, vulnerable nations facing starvation, gas pumps running completely dry, and life-saving medicines suddenly becoming unavailable. You see, we're constantly distracted by the visible, flashy strength of militaries, but the world's true vulnerability actually lies in these 14 narrow waterways. Think of them as the absolute main arteries of global trade. You don't actually need a massive army to bring the world to a grinding halt. You just need to choke off these highly specific, super congested points. Doing that suffocates global supply chains literally overnight.
To really wrap our heads around how this works, we've broken this explainer down into 4 critical parts. First, we'll look at the wallet hit. Second, the powder kegs. Third, the shifting map. And finally, who controls the future.
Act 1. The wallet hit. Oil, trade, and price shocks. All right, let's kick off our journey in the Middle East, which is, of course, home to the world's greatest energy treasure, oil. The physical geography here is the perfect illustration of how a blocked waterway thousands of miles away directly translates into mind-blowing inflation right at your local grocery store or gas station. Just wrap your mind around this number, 30%. That is the chunk of the world's total oil supply that passes through the Strait of Hormuz. Positioned right between Iran and Oman, this gap is incredibly tight. We're talking only about 33 kilometers wide. Every single day, millions of barrels of oil squeeze through this tiny bottleneck on massive ships heading out to the US, Europe, and Asia. If a conflict broke out and an armed force just stood at this gap and declared it closed, global gas prices would instantly spike to levels we've literally never seen before.
Moving a bit further down the coast, we run into another incredibly dangerous door, the Bab-el-Mandeb Strait, sitting right between Yemen and Djibouti. In Arabic, this translates to the Gate of Tears, and wow, did it earn that dark name. Historically, treacherous waves and pirates destroyed countless ships here, and today, the danger is still very, very real. You've probably seen the headlines about Houthi forces in Yemen attacking cargo ships right in this exact area, which is forcing international trade companies to completely rethink their entire global routes. And here is exactly how that geographical headache hits your wallet. When the Gate of Tears is blocked, ships traveling from Asia to Europe simply can't enter the Red Sea. Instead, they are forced into this massive, grueling detour all the way around the entire African continent, passing the Cape of Good Hope. This adds weeks of travel time. It costs millions of dollars in extra fuel. Plus, it throws ships into the terrifyingly rough waves of the South Indian Ocean. And ultimately, that massive extra cost is passed directly down to us, the consumers, driving up the prices of global goods across the board.
Now, what's really interesting about this is the sheer mind-boggling scale of the financial damage when these systems fail. Let's say ships do make it safely through the Red Sea. They then reach the man-made marvel of the Suez Canal in Egypt. But remember March 2021? That massive cargo ship, the Ever Given, got stuck sideways in the canal. For just 6 days, that door was closed. The result was a staggering $54 billion lost to the global economy. Crucial food, electronics, and heavy machinery were just sitting completely idle in the middle of the ocean.
Heading up into Europe, we stumble upon a network of similarly fragile doors. First, you've got the Strait of Gibraltar. It's this incredibly narrow gap between Spain and Morocco, currently guarded by a British military base. If that closes, the entire Mediterranean Sea essentially turns into a trapped lake. Then over to Turkey, which controls the Bosporus and Dardanelles Straits. Under international law, Turkey gets to decide who passes through. That makes it a massive red line for Russia, because these are literally the only routes connecting Russia's year-round unfrozen Black Sea ports to the rest of the world. And finally, the English Channel. It processes over 400 ships every single day. It's a choke point so vital that defending it from Hitler was actually a primary reason Britain survived World War II.
Act 2. The powder kegs, flashpoints, and World War III. Now, let's shift our focus over to Asia, where the stakes elevate dramatically.
We aren't just talking about delayed packages or economic hiccups anymore. We are looking at geographical flashpoints that hold the terrifying potential to actually ignite World War III.
The absolute ultimate flashpoint in the world right now is the Taiwan Strait. Why? Well, because Taiwan holds a staggering 70% global monopoly on the manufacturing of advanced microchips. These are the literal brains inside your smartphone, your car, your laptop, everything. And every single one of those chips travels right through the Taiwan Strait. So this waterway isn't just some standard shipping lane. It is quite literally the lifeline of modern technology.
But the tension here isn't solely about microchips. It is deeply rooted in physical, oceanic geography. If you look at a map, China is currently boxed in by a chain of islands stretching all the way from the Philippines up to Taiwan and over to Japan. The waters in this area are surprisingly shallow, which happens to be a massive problem for military submarines. If a conflict were to erupt between the US and China, China's naval fleet can't easily sneak out into the deep waters of the Pacific Ocean without passing right through these heavily monitored island chains. For China, controlling Taiwan represents a direct, totally unhindered coastline right out into the Pacific.
This geographic anxiety extends even further south to a geopolitical strategist famously called the Malacca Dilemma. The Strait of Malacca, sandwiched right between Malaysia, Singapore, and Indonesia, handles roughly 25% of all global sea trade. It is the main route for nearly all the oil and goods heading to China, Japan, and South Korea. So China lives with this deep-seated fear that, in the event of a war, the U.S. Navy could simply blockade this one single strait, severing China's supply lines entirely and totally crippling its economy. Incidentally, this unbelievably busy door is exactly why the tiny nation of Singapore has become one of the absolute wealthiest countries on Earth. They are the gatekeepers.
And this brilliantly illustrates how geography completely forces our hand. If Malacca gets too crowded or worse gets blockaded, ships have to scramble to find alternatives through the islands of Indonesia. You've got the Sunda Strait, sure, but it's shallow and terrifyingly home to active underwater volcanoes, no thanks. Then there's the Lombok Strait. It has the deep waters that those massive oil tankers need, but it's a much longer journey. Indonesia is basically sitting on a gold mine of strategic alternatives here, holding immense potential power as a future maritime giant.
Act 3. The shifting map, climate change, and new routes. You know, the map as we currently know it isn't actually permanent. As we move over to the Americas and look toward the far north, we really have to recognize how climate change is literally redrawing the map of global trade, creating entirely new vulnerabilities and entirely new doors.
Take the incredible Panama Canal. I mean, it's an absolute engineering marvel. It uses this complex lock system that essentially lifts massive cargo ships up and right over a mountain range using fresh water connecting the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Historically, it's been the ultimate secret to rapid U.S. naval and trade movements. But today, climate change is causing the water levels in the canal to drop drastically, threatening its entire function. The alternative, if it fails, reverting all the way back down to the Strait of Magellan at the very bottom of South America. That is an incredibly treacherous, freezing, stormy historical route near Antarctica that modern ship captains desperately want to avoid.
But here's the wild thing. While climate change is actively threatening our old routes, it's simultaneously creating brand new ones. Way up north, right between Alaska and Russia, lies the Bering Strait. Historically, this has been completely blocked by thick, impassable ice. But as global warming accelerates, that ice is melting rapidly. Within the next 20 to 30 years, this is going to become a wide-open, highly efficient new trade door connecting Asia directly to Europe and the Americas. And make absolutely no mistake about it, both the US and Russia are already aggressively preparing to fight for control over this brand new geopolitical choke point.
Act 4. Who controls the future? We have traveled the entire globe in this explainer. From the oil-rich straits of the Middle East, through the fragile canals of Europe, past the terrifying powder kegs of Asia, all the way up to the melting ice of the Arctic. These incredibly fragile threads are what truly connect our modern world.
So the crucial point I want to leave you with revolves around the number 10. Out of the 14 critical geographic doors we've explored today, these vital pathways that have historically and currently controlled the entire world's economy, the United States currently maintains a direct or indirect presence in 10 of them. That right there is the unseen, quiet architecture of global superpower status.
Which leaves us with one final, deeply important thought to ponder. If global power isn't actually about the size of your army, but rather about controlling these precise, narrow bottlenecks, and if the next major global conflict is destined to be fought over access to these 14 fragile doors, who truly holds the keys right now? It's an incredibly delicate balance.